How far would you go to uncover the truth? Imagine stumbling upon a crime so dark it could destroy lives, including your own. This is the story of a boy who found himself at the center of a deadly web of lies, buried secrets, and corruption. Did you know that over 75% of whistleblowers face retaliation, even when they're in the right? Now picture this: a 12-year-old boy, armed only with a camera, standing up to a powerful, corrupt detective with everything to lose. What would you do in his shoes? Stay with us as we unravel buried truths, a tale of courage, resilience, and redemption that will keep you on the edge of your seat. This story will remind you. Some truths refuse to stay buried. Let me know if you'd like to tweak it further. Owen Clark adjusted the strap of his camera as he stepped over a fallen branch. The woods behind his house were his refuge, a world of towering pines and chirping birds that let him forget, if only for a while, about the suffocating silence at home. He crouched by a tree trunk, spotting a robin's nest tucked between branches. As he lifted his camera to snap a photo, muffled voices drifted through the trees. Owen froze. He wasn't supposed to see anyone out here. Curiosity overtook caution as he crept closer. Hiding behind a dense bush, he peered through the leaves. Two men were digging a hole. A large tarp stained with dark red streaks lay beside them. "Stop whining and dig," one barked. He was tall, broad-shouldered, and intimidating, his gray eyes scanning the clearing like a hawk. The other man, shorter and stocky, hesitated with his shovel. "This wasn't the deal, Victor," the smaller man muttered. Victor stepped closer, his voice low but menacing. "You're in as deep as I am, Prescott. Now shut up and finish the job." Owen's breath caught in his throat. A branch cracked under his foot. Both men froze. What was that? Victor's hand instinctively moved toward his holster. Prescott's eyes darted nervously toward the trees. "Probably just an animal," Prescott said, his voice shaky. Victor narrowed his eyes but didn't pursue the noise. "Just hurry up. We can't stay here." Owen didn't wait to hear more. He slung his camera over his neck, his heart pounding, and bolted back toward the edge of the woods. Owen burst through the front door, his chest heaving. His mother, Linda, looked up from the kitchen sink, startled. "Owen, what's wrong?" They buried something. I saw it," he gasped. His words tumbled out as he struggled to catch his breath. Two men in the woods. A tarp. Blood. "Slow down," Linda interrupted, drying her hands on a towel. "What are you talking about?" "I saw two cops burying something in the woods," Owen repeated, his voice rising in desperation. "It looked like a body." "Owen, enough." Linda's tone was sharp now. "You're letting your imagination run wild." "It's not my imagination," Owen snapped. "Why won't you believe me? What's going on?" Mark's voice came from the hallway. He stood in the doorway, his worn shirt rumpled, his green eyes tired. "Owen thinks he saw something in the woods," Linda said, her voice tight. "But I'm sure it's nothing." "It's not nothing," Owen insisted. "I saw two cops. One of them called the other Victor." Mark's expression shifted slightly at the name, but he quickly masked it. "Look, buddy, you've had a lot on your mind lately. Maybe you misunderstood what you saw." Owen glared at both of them, his frustration boiling over. "I know what I saw." He stormed off to his room, slamming the door behind him. That night, Owen sat on his bed, the blurry photo pulled up on his camera screen. It wasn't much, just a faint outline of a tarp and disturbed dirt, but it was enough for him. He had proof. A knock at the door made him jump. "Owen, can I come in?" Mark's voice was quiet but firm. Owen hesitated before muttering, "Yeah?" Mark stepped inside, his hands in his pockets. "Your mom's worried about you. You want to tell me what's going on?" "I already told you," Owen said, holding out the camera. "Here, see for yourself." Mark took the camera and studied the image. "It's not clear what this is, Owen," he said carefully. "But if you're telling the truth, this could be serious." "I am telling the truth," Owen said, his voice steady. "You believe me, don't you?" Mark sighed, running a hand through his thinning hair. "I don't know, kiddo, but I'll look into it. Just don't go back there, okay?" Owen nodded reluctantly, though he could see the doubt in his father's eyes. It only made him more determined. Victor Kane leaned back in his office chair, his gray eyes fixed on Thomas Prescott, who sat across from him, fidgeting nervously. "I told you, Aaron. I heard something out there," Prescott said, his voice shaking. "It didn't sound like an animal." Victor's jaw tightened. "And you didn't think to check?" "You said we had to leave quickly," Prescott mumbled. Victor stood abruptly, pacing the room. "We can't afford any mistakes, Tom. Go back. Make sure there's nothing that could lead anyone to us." "And if there is?" Prescott asked. Victor leaned in, his voice dangerously low. "You handle it." Owen lay in bed, staring at the ceiling. His father's words replayed in his mind. Don't go back there. But how could he leave it alone? He grabbed his camera and a flashlight, tiptoeing past his mother, who had fallen asleep on the couch. The woods were dark and silent as he approached the spot where he'd seen the men. His flashlight beam cut through the shadows, illuminating the disturbed ground. But just as he crouched to inspect the area, he froze. A car was parked nearby. Its headlights were off, but Owen recognized the silhouette of the man inside. Victor Kane. Owen's heart raced as he ducked behind a tree. What was Victor doing here? And did he know Owen was onto him? Owen pressed his back against the rough bark of the tree, his heart pounding like a drum. Victor Kane's figure moved steadily into the woods, the beam of his flashlight slicing through the darkness. Owen's fingers tightened around the strap of his camera. He debated following the man, but fear rooted him in place. As Victor disappeared deeper into the woods, Owen saw his chance and crept toward the edge of the clearing. The sight of the disturbed dirt and scattered leaves made his stomach churn. Suddenly, a sharp rustling sound came from behind. Owen whipped around, expecting Victor to be standing there, but it was only the wind stirring the underbrush. He let out a shaky breath. Then, as if sensing something, Victor stopped and turned back toward his car. Owen froze, barely breathing. Victor's flashlight scanned the area, the light passing dangerously close to where Owen crouched. After a tense moment, Victor shrugged and returned to his car. Owen waited until the sound of the engine faded before sprinting home, his mind racing. The first light of dawn was peeking through the curtains when Owen crept through the front door. He winced as it creaked, but it was too late. "Owen Clark." Linda's voice was sharp and full of worry. She was sitting in the living room, her arms crossed. Mark stood by the kitchen doorway, his face unreadable. "Where were you?" Linda demanded, standing up. "Do you have any idea how worried I've been?" "I had to go back," Owen said defensively, clutching his camera. "I saw him. Victor Kane. He was out there." "Wait, what?" Mark stepped forward, his brow furrowing. "You saw Victor in the woods?" "Yes. He was checking the site. He knows something's up," Owen said breathlessly. "Owen, you cannot keep sneaking out like this," Linda interrupted, her voice trembling. "What if something happened to you?" "You're not listening," Owen shouted. "Victor knows. If we don't do something, he'll get away with it. Linda's face softened into worry, but her voice remained firm. Owen, this isn't your fight. It's too dangerous. Mark's gaze flickered between them. Owen, are you sure it was Victor? I'm positive, Owen said. He was right there. Mark exchanged a glance with Linda, who shook her head in exasperation. Fine, Mark said quietly. I'll look into it. But you have to promise me you won't go back to those woods. Do you hear me? Owen hesitated, then nodded reluctantly. Fine. Linda didn't look convinced. I'm serious, Owen. This ends now. Victor's office was dimly lit, the blinds drawn to keep out the morning sun. Prescott sat stiffly in the chair opposite his desk, his fingers fidgeting with the edge of his shirt. I went back, like you asked, Prescott said nervously. The site's fine, but I found something nearby. Victor leaned forward, his gray eyes narrowing. What did you find? Prescott pulled a small object from his pocket and placed it on the desk. It was a child's keychain, worn and scuffed. The name Owen was faintly visible on its surface. Victor's jaw tightened. Where did you find this? Near the grave, Prescott admitted, his voice shaking. What if a kid saw us? Victor's hand slammed on the desk, making Prescott jump. If a kid saw us, we make sure they didn't see enough to matter. Do you understand? Prescott nodded, swallowing hard. What do you want me to do? Find out who this Owen is, Victor ordered, and keep an eye on them. If they know something, deal with it. At school later that day, Owen sat across from his best friend, Marcus, in the cafeteria. He pushed his lunch tray aside, too restless to eat. You look like you've seen a ghost, Marcus said, biting into his sandwich. What's going on? Owen hesitated, glancing around to make sure no one was listening. I need to tell you something, but you can't freak out. Okay. Marcus leaned in, intrigued. Owen pulled out his camera and showed Marcus the photos. I saw two cops in the woods. They were burying something. A body, I think. Marcus's eyes widened. No way. Are you serious? I swear, Owen said. One of them is Victor Kane. Marcus whistled low. Dude, that guy's scary. He's like a legend around here. I need more proof, Owen said. If I don't do something, they'll get away with it. Marcus's face shifted from awe to concern. Owen, this is insane. What if they catch you? We'll be careful, Owen said quickly. But I can't do this alone. Marcus hesitated, then nodded. Fine, but if we're doing this, we need a plan. Later that night, Mark parked his car at the edge of the woods, his hands gripping the steering wheel. He knew Linda would kill him if she found out he was here, but Owen's story, and the name Victor Kane, had been gnawing at him all day. He stepped out of the car and made his way into the woods, flashlight in hand. The air was thick with tension as he followed Owen's description of the site. When he reached the clearing, his breath caught. The ground was disturbed, just as Owen had said. Mark crouched, snapping photos of the area. As he stood up, the sound of an engine rumbled in the distance. He quickly turned off his flashlight and ducked behind a tree. An unmarked car rolled into view, its headlights off. Mark's heart raced as he recognized the figure stepping out. Victor Kane. Mark held his breath, his pulse pounding in his ears. Victor scanned the area, his flashlight darting across the ground. After a few tense minutes, Victor returned to his car and drove away. Mark waited until the sound of the car faded before sprinting back to his own vehicle. As he started the engine, one thought consumed him. Victor knows. Victor Kane sat in his dimly lit office, his fingers drumming on the desk. Prescott stood across from him, sweat pooling at his temples. You're telling me Mark Clark was seen near the woods? Victor asked, his voice low and calculated. Yes, sir, Prescott stammered. He was taking pictures. I thought he might have seen something. Victor's eyes narrowed. This family is becoming a problem. First the kid, now the father. Maybe it's just a coincidence, Prescott ventured, though his voice lacked conviction. Victor stood abruptly, looming over his accomplice. Nothing is a coincidence, Tom. Keep an eye on them. If they so much as sneeze suspiciously, I want to know. Prescott nodded quickly, backing toward the door. Victor's gaze didn't waver. As Prescott left, Victor muttered, "If they think they can cross me, they'll regret it." Owen tapped on Marcus's shoulder as they crouched behind a tree near the burial site. The boys had snuck out after dark, armed with flashlights and Owen's camera. "There," Owen whispered, pointing at the faintly disturbed ground ahead. Marcus hesitated. "Owen, this is crazy. What if Victor comes back?" "He won't," Owen said, though his voice wavered. "We'll be quick." They crept forward, brushing away leaves and dirt. The edge of the tarp peeked through the soil, its dark red stains stark against the earth. Owen snapped several photos, his hands shaking. "We've got enough," Marcus said, pulling at Owen's sleeve. "Let's go." But before they could leave, a sound froze them in place. Footsteps. "Someone's coming," Owen hissed, dragging Marcus toward the underbrush. They crouched low, holding their breath as a flashlight beam swept across the clearing. Victor's voice rang out, sharp and commanding. "Who's out here?" Owen's heart pounded as the footsteps grew louder. The flashlight beam drew closer before pausing near the tarp. After a long moment, Victor grunted and walked back toward his car. The boys didn't wait for the engine to fade. They bolted, their footsteps barely touching the ground as they ran for safety. Linda Clark stared at the photos spread across the kitchen table, her face pale. "You went back to the woods?" she demanded, her voice rising. "It wasn't just him," Mark said, stepping between Linda and Owen. "I went too." Linda's glare shifted to Mark. "You promised me you'd keep him out of this. You're supposed to protect him, not encourage this insanity." "I didn't encourage it," Mark said defensively. "But he's right. Something's going on, and Victor Kane is at the center of it." "I don't care what's going on," Linda snapped. "I care about keeping our family safe." Owen, who had been silent until now, finally spoke up. "Mom, if we don't do something, he'll just keep hurting people." Liam wouldn't have stayed quiet. Linda's expression softened at the mention of Liam, but her fear remained. "And look where standing up got Liam," she said quietly. The words hung heavy in the air. Mark's jaw tightened, and Owen's fists clenched. "I'll handle it," Mark said after a long pause. "But I need your trust, Linda." Linda shook her head. "Just don't drag Owen into this anymore. Please." Prescott sat in his car outside the local diner, nervously sipping coffee from a paper cup. His phone buzzed, and he flinched before answering. "Where are you?" Victor's voice was cold and sharp. I needed a break," Prescott stammered. "A break?" Victor's tone turned menacing. "While I'm dealing with a family that knows too much?" Prescott swallowed hard. "I thought you had it under control." Victor's laugh was devoid of humor. "You're getting sloppy, Tom. If you can't handle this, maybe I should find someone who can." "I can handle it," Prescott said quickly. "Good," Victor said, his voice dropping. "Because if you betray me, Tom, I won't just bury you. I'll bury everyone you care about." The line went dead, leaving Prescott staring at his reflection in the windshield, guilt and fear battling within him. Later that night, Mark sat in the living room, surrounded by boxes of Liam's belongings. He sifted through old notebooks, photos, and keepsakes, searching for anything that might connect his son to Victor Kane. His hands froze as he pulled out a battered leather journal. The pages were filled with notes, maps, and dates, all related to Victor Kane. Liam had been investigating the detective before his death. Mark's heart sank as he read Liam's final entry. Kane's involved. I have proof, but I need more before I go public. I can't risk Dad finding out. He'll try to stop me. Tears stung Mark's eyes as the realization hit him. Liam's death hadn't been an accident. He had been silenced. Mark closed the journal, his resolve hardening. He had to finish what Liam started. Linda froze when she spotted the folded piece of paper pinned to the front door. The handwriting was jagged and bold, with 3 chilling words: "Stay silent, or else." Her hands trembled as she called Mark and Owen into the kitchen. Mark's face hardened when he read the note, but Owen's expression shifted to guilt. "This is because of me," Owen said, his voice cracking. "I should have stayed out of it." "No," Mark said firmly, placing a hand on Owen's shoulder. "This is on Victor Kane, not you." Linda snatched the note from Mark's hand. "This is proof that he's watching us. Mark, we can't keep doing this. He'll hurt us." "We can't back down now," Mark countered. "The closer we get to the truth, the more desperate he'll become. That means we're onto something." "Onto something?" Linda's voice rose. "We're putting our lives at risk. I can't lose another son." Owen's gaze dropped to the floor. "I'll stop," he mumbled. "I won't do anything else." Mark frowned but nodded. "Good. For now, we need to lay low. But I'm not letting him scare us into silence." Linda crossed her arms, her face a mask of fear and frustration. "You'd better hope you're right." At lunch the next day, Marcus plopped down beside Owen in the schoolyard, his backpack slung over one shoulder. "What's the plan?" he asked, biting into an apple. "There isn't one," Owen muttered, picking at his sandwich. "It's over." Marcus frowned. "What do you mean? You've got photos, evidence. We can't just let it go." "My mom's terrified," Owen said, his voice barely above a whisper. "And Kane left a threat at my house. I can't risk it." Marcus leaned closer. "Owen, if we don't act, Kane wins. What if he does this to someone else? You're the only one who can stop him." "I'm not brave like you think," Owen said, shaking his head. "I'm just scared." Marcus sighed, then grabbed his phone. "What if we send the photos to someone who can help? A journalist, the police outside of town. No one has to know it's us." Owen looked up, his hazel eyes uncertain. "You really think that'll work?" "It's better than doing nothing," Marcus said, his tone resolute. After a long pause, Owen nodded. "Okay, but we have to be careful." Mark's phone buzzed late that evening as he sat at his desk, studying Liam's journal. The caller ID was blocked. He hesitated before answering. "Hello? It's Prescott." The voice on the other end was shaky. "I need to talk." Mark sat up straight, his pulse quickening. "What do you want?" "I know who killed your son," Prescott said, his voice barely audible. "And I can prove it." Mark's grip tightened on the phone. "Why are you telling me this now?" "I can't do it anymore," Prescott said. "I've done terrible things, but Kane, he's a monster. I'm done covering for him. Meet me," Mark said without hesitation. "Somewhere safe." "The old warehouse on the east side," Prescott whispered. "Midnight. Come alone." Mark hesitated. "If you're lying." "I'm not," Prescott interrupted. "Just be there." The line went dead, leaving Mark staring at the phone, his mind racing. Mark parked his car a block away from the warehouse, the shadows of the abandoned industrial district stretching long in the moonlight. He approached the building cautiously, his footsteps echoing in the eerie silence. Inside, Prescott was pacing nervously, clutching a folder. When he saw Mark, he froze. "You came." Mark stepped closer, his voice low. "Start talking." Prescott handed over the folder, which contained financial records, falsified reports, and photos linking Victor Kane to a network of illegal activity. "This is everything I've got. It's not enough to bury him, but it's a start." Mark flipped through the papers, his jaw tightening. "Why now?" "Because I'm tired of being afraid," Prescott said, his voice breaking. "And because your son didn't deserve what happened to him." Mark's fists clenched. "You knew?" "I didn't know it was going to happen," Prescott said quickly, "but I didn't stop it either. Kane had him killed because Liam was getting too close to the truth." Mark took a step forward, his fury barely contained. "You let my son die." "I'm trying to make it right," Prescott pleaded. "Please, take the evidence and—" The sound of tires screeching outside cut him off. Both men turned toward the door as Victor Kane's voice echoed through the warehouse. "Tom, you in here?" "Damn it," Prescott hissed. "Hide. Now." Mark ducked behind a stack of crates as Victor entered, his gun drawn. "You've been acting strange, Tom. Care to explain why?" Prescott swallowed hard. I needed some air." Victor stepped closer, his eyes narrowing. "Air? Or are you meeting someone?" "No, I swear," Prescott stammered. Victor's gaze scanned the room, but before he could search further, the sound of distant sirens interrupted. He cursed under his breath. "We'll talk later." As Victor left, Prescott turned to Mark. "Go. Now." Mark didn't hesitate, slipping out the back door with the folder clutched tightly in his hands. When Mark returned home, Linda was waiting for him in the living room, her arms crossed. "Where were you?" Mark hesitated, then placed the folder on the coffee table. "I was getting this." Linda opened the folder and flipped through the pages, her face pale. "What is this?" "Evidence," Mark said, "from one of Kane's men. It proves he's been running an operation for years, and that he killed Liam." Linda's hands trembled as she dropped the papers. "You're sure?" "I am," Mark said firmly. "We need to use this." Linda sank onto the couch, her head in her hands. "Mark, this is too much. What if he comes after Owen? After us?" "He already is," Mark said. "That's why we can't stop now." Owen appeared in the doorway, his expression determined. "I'll help." "No," Linda said sharply. "This isn't your fight." "It is," Owen said. "Liam would have wanted us to finish this." Mark nodded, placing a hand on Owen's shoulder. "Then we do it together." Linda's tears spilled over, but she didn't argue. "Just promise me you'll keep him safe." "I promise," Mark said, though the weight of his words felt heavier than ever. Victor Kane sat in his car, parked across from the Clark home. His fingers drummed against the steering wheel as his sharp eyes scanned the darkened windows. The once pristine control he held over his life was unraveling. Mark Clark was getting too bold, and Victor could feel the walls closing in. His phone buzzed. "What?" He snapped into the receiver. "It's Prescott," came the hesitant voice on the other end. "There's no movement tonight." Victor gritted his teeth. "Keep watching. I don't care if you have to sit there all night. If they make one wrong move, I want to know." "Yes, sir," Prescott replied, his voice heavy with reluctance. Victor hung up, his mind racing. He wasn't just losing control, he was losing trust, and that made him dangerous. Inside the Clark home, Mark paced the living room, his hand clutching a phone. Across from him sat Captain Renee Daniels, her sharp, no-nonsense demeanor commanding the room. "We've got enough to act," Daniels said. "Prescott's testimony, the recordings, the photos. It's enough to start bringing Victor in, but not enough to convict him," Mark countered. "You know he'll wriggle out of it if we don't take him down completely." Daniels nodded. "Which is why we're setting a trap. I'll need your cooperation, and I'll need you to keep your son out of it." "I'm staying in," Owen piped up from the doorway. His voice was steady, his eyes resolute. "This started because of me. I'm not sitting back now." Mark turned to Daniels. "He's right. Owen's part of this." Daniels hesitated, then sighed. "Fine, but if he's involved, he follows my orders. No risks." Owen nodded. "Deal." Mark pulled out the evidence Prescott had given him and laid it on the table. "This is how we start. And when Victor comes after us, we'll be ready." Victor's patience snapped that night. His phone buzzed with a message from an unknown number. The attachment was a photo of the tarp buried in the woods, accompanied by the text, "We know everything." Victor's face darkened. He slammed the phone onto the dashboard and started the car. He drove straight to the Clark house, his mind set on eliminating the problem once and for all. Owen sat on the porch, restless and unable to sleep. He didn't notice Victor's car pulling up until it was too late. The detective moved quickly, his hand clamping over Owen's mouth before he could scream. "Stay quiet, kid," Victor growled, dragging Owen toward the car. "You've caused enough trouble," Owen thrashed, but Victor's grip was iron. Within seconds, he was shoved into the back seat, the door slamming shut behind him. Prescott stared at his phone, his hands trembling. Victor's message had been clear: "Handle this, or I will." But Prescott couldn't go through with it. He had crossed too many lines already. His phone buzzed again. It was a call from Mark Clark. "Prescott, where's Victor?" Mark's voice was sharp and demanding. "He took your son," Prescott admitted, his voice cracking. "He's heading to the warehouse." Mark's heart sank. "You need to stop him." "I'll do what I can," Prescott said, steeling himself. "But you need to get there fast." After hanging up, Prescott grabbed his gun and headed for the warehouse. He knew he wouldn't walk away from this, but he had to make it right. The warehouse was dark and eerily quiet when Captain Daniels and her SWAT team arrived. Mark was already there, his face pale with worry. "Victor's inside," Daniels whispered, motioning for her team to move into position. "Stay here." "I'm not waiting out here," Mark insisted. "My son's in there." Daniels hesitated, then nodded. "Stay behind me." Inside, Victor paced the warehouse, his gun drawn. Owen was tied to a chair, his hazel eyes defiant despite the fear coursing through him. "You should have stayed out of this," Victor spat. "Now look where you've ended up." "Someone had to stand up to you," Owen shot back. "You're just a coward hiding behind a badge." Victor raised his gun, his face twisting with rage. "Say that again." Before he could act, Prescott stepped out of the shadows, his gun trained on Victor. "Put the gun down, Aaron." Victor turned, his eyes narrowing. "You're betraying me, Tom? After everything I've done for you?" "This has to stop," Prescott said, his voice trembling. "Let the kid go." Victor smirked. "You don't have the guts." The sound of a door slamming open made Victor spin. Daniels and her team stormed in, shouting commands. Victor fired a wild shot, forcing everyone to take cover. In the chaos, Prescott lunged at Victor, knocking the gun from his hand. The two men struggled as Owen managed to free himself from the chair. He darted toward Mark, who pulled him into a tight embrace. Daniels moved in swiftly, pinning Victor to the ground as her team secured the area. Prescott sat slumped against a wall, blood seeping from a wound in his shoulder. "You did the right thing," Daniels told Prescott as paramedics arrived. "It's over." Mark held Owen tightly, tears streaming down his face. "I thought I lost you." Owen pulled back, his face pale but determined. "We stopped him, Dad. Liam would be proud." The courthouse steps were swarmed with reporters, microphones thrust forward as cameras clicked incessantly. Mark Clark held Owen's hand tightly, shielding him from the chaos. Linda walked beside them, her expression wary but composed. "Mr. Clark," one journalist shouted, "how does it feel to know your efforts brought down Detective Kane?" Mark hesitated, his grip on Owen tightening. "This isn't about me," he said. "This is about justice. For my son, for my family, and for everyone Victor Kane hurt." Owen glanced at the crowd, overwhelmed by the attention. Linda leaned down, whispering, "Just keep walking, sweetheart." Inside, the courthouse buzzed with tension. Captain Renee Daniels approached, her sharp eyes scanning the room. "The evidence you gave us is leading to a full-scale investigation," she told Mark. "This town's corruption runs deeper than we thought." Mark nodded. "What happens now?" Danielle's lips thinned. "We take down everyone involved, no matter how high it goes. But you should prepare yourselves. This isn't over." Mark exchanged a glance with Linda. They both knew the fight wasn't finished, but for the first time, there was hope. The courtroom was packed. Victor Kane sat at the defense table, his sharp features betraying no emotion. Beside him, his attorney flipped through a stack of papers, occasionally whispering into Victor's ear. Prescott was called to the stand. He looked uneasy but determined as he raised his right hand to swear in. "Mr. Prescott," the prosecutor began, "you worked with Detective Kane for over a decade. Can you describe his methods?" Prescott's voice trembled at first but grew steadier as he spoke. "Kane didn't just commit crimes, he created a system. Bribes, blackmail, threats. He controlled everyone around him. And what made you decide to come forward?" Prescott hesitated, then glanced at Mark and Owen in the gallery. "Because I couldn't live with myself anymore. A kid almost died because of him. I couldn't let it keep happening." Victor's cold stare bore into Prescott, but the officer didn't flinch. As the trial progressed, the depth of Victor's corruption came to light, shocking the community. When the verdict was announced, guilty on all counts, a collective sigh of relief swept through the room. Owen leaned into Linda, a small, hopeful smile breaking across his face. Weeks later, the Clark home felt different. There was still tension, but it was softer now, interspersed with moments of warmth. Owen sat at the kitchen table, doodling absent-mindedly on a piece of paper. Linda set a plate of cookies in front of him. "How are the nightmares?" she asked gently. "Better," Owen replied. "I'm still scared sometimes, but it's not as bad." Linda nodded, brushing his hair back. "It'll take time, but you're strong, Owen. Stronger than I ever realized." Mark walked in, holding a stack of papers. "Guess what?" he said, trying to hide his grin. "What?" Owen asked, sitting up straighter. "A magazine wants me to write an expose on the trial," Mark said. "It's not my old job, but it's a start." Linda smiled softly. "That's great, Mark." "It's because of you, Owen," Mark said, turning to his son. "You didn't just fight for justice. You gave me a second chance." Owen ducked his head, his cheeks flushing. "I just wanted to do the right thing." "And you did," Mark said. "More than you know." A month later, The town held a small ceremony to honor the Clark family and Captain Daniels for their bravery. Owen stood nervously beside his parents as the mayor handed him a plaque. "This is for your courage and determination," the mayor said. "You reminded us all that one voice can make a difference." The crowd clapped, and Owen glanced at Marcus, who gave him a thumbs up from the audience. For the first time in months, Owen felt pride instead of fear. Later that evening, Owen and Marcus sat on the porch, watching the stars. "So, you're famous now," Marcus teased. "What's next?" Owen laughed. "I don't know. Normal sounds good for a while." Marcus grinned. "You deserve it." The house was quiet as dawn broke, the sky painted in shades of pink and gold. Owen sat by his bedroom window, clutching Liam's journal. He opened it to the last page, where Liam had written, "The truth matters, even when it's hard." Tears welled in Owen's eyes, but he smiled through them. "We did it, Liam," he whispered. "We didn't let him win." As the sun rose higher, filling the room with light, Owen felt a weight lift from his chest. The fight was over, but the lessons would stay with him forever. For the first time, he felt peace. What lengths would you go to for justice? The story of Owen Clark reminds us that even the smallest voices can uncover the biggest truths. But in a world where corruption runs deep and the cost of standing up is high, the question remains: how far are we willing to go to fight for what's right? If this tale of courage and resilience has moved you, share your thoughts in the comments below. Would you have done what Owen did? Or would fear hold you back? Let us know. Your perspective matters. And before you go, don't forget to subscribe to our channel for more gripping stories of determination, justice, and human spirit. By subscribing, you'll never miss another video that keeps you on the edge of your seat. Hit the bell icon too, so you're always the first to know when a new story drops. Thanks for watching, and we'll see you in the next one.